Hey guys, tonight we're talking about what life was really like for a Crusader knight in the Holy Land. Here's something they never mention in the history books. More Crusaders died shitting themselves to death on disease-ridden ships than ever fell to Saracen swords. For every glorious charge depicted in manuscripts, 10 men drowned in their own vomit below deck. The Church promised salvation and glory. What they delivered was months of medieval hell floating on wooden coffins across the Mediterranean, where your chances of reaching Jerusalem were about the same as surviving a game of Russian roulette. The greatest trick the Pope ever pulled was convincing thousands of armed men that dying of dysentery in the name of Christ counted as martyrdom. Dear viewers, our big goal is to reach 1,000 subscribers on this channel, and with your support we can achieve it. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about history. Subscribe so you don't miss them. We are sincerely grateful to everyone who helps us achieve this goal. Also, write in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious to see people from all over the world brought together by a single story. And now, let's move on to today's story. You're Guillaume de Montfort, 23 years old. You've never seen a Muslim. You've never questioned that Jerusalem belongs to Christendom by divine right. You know God favours the faithful the way you know winter follows autumn. The Pope's words reach your father's estate in Burgundy in the spring of 1187, carried by a travelling priest whose voice shakes with righteous fury. Saladin threatens the Holy Land. The true cross itself stands in danger. Every able knight must take up the pilgrimage or face eternal damnation. The decision tears your family apart within a week. Your father forbids it. You're the eldest son. The estate needs you. Your younger brother Pierre supports the old man, seeing his own inheritance growing if you leave. Your mother weeps, having already lost one son to fever 3 winters past. But the priest's words burrow into your skull like worms into an apple. Each night you dream of golden domes and Saracen hordes. The local bishop makes it simple: fight for Christ or burn forever. You take the cross on a Sunday in June. The ceremony lasts an hour. The consequences last a lifetime. Financing the journey devours half your inheritance. A warhorse costs what a peasant family earns in 5 years. Armour, weapons, supplies for months of travel. The numbers stagger you. You sell 3 villages to a merchant from Lyon, watching your father's face harden into a mask of disgust. Pierre smiles. The estate will be his when the old man dies. You've traded your birthright for a cloth cross sewn onto your tunic. 37 men gather under your banner by August. Minor nobility, their sons, professional soldiers seeking pay and redemption. Most owe you feudal service. 3 join willingly, believing the Pope's promises. The blacksmith's son comes because his wife died in childbirth and he no longer cares if he lives. An old sergeant named Bertrand joins because he's fought in Spain against the Moors and knows what's coming. He never says why that makes him want to go back. The march to Marseille takes 3 weeks. 2 men desert before you reach the coast. One breaks his leg fording a river, left behind in a monastery with prayers and little hope. The Mediterranean waits like a blue promise, full of lies. Ships pack the harbour, their hulls already stinking of human cargo. Genoese merchants charge triple the normal rate, knowing Crusaders have no choice. You pay. The vessel assigned to your company looks older than your grandfather, wood dark with rot along the waterline. The captain speaks French with an accent so thick you barely understand his assurances. 60 men board a space meant for 40. The smell hits you first when you descend below deck. Not normal unwashed bodies. Something worse. Fear sweating through skin. Old vomit ground into planks. Piss and shit fermenting in the bilge. Your stomach lurches before the ship even leaves port. Bertrand tells you to eat light and stay topside as much as possible. You ignore him the first day. By the second, you're vomiting over the rail with everyone else. The Mediterranean stretches endless. Days blur into a rhythm of misery. Dawn brings momentary relief from the stifling darkness below. Then the sun climbs, and the deck becomes a griddle. Men crowd any shade, fighting for space. Water rationed to a cup per day, taste of the barrel. Food consists of hardtack so tough it chips teeth and salted pork that was probably bad before you left France. The first death comes on day 6. A young knight named Geoffroy, barely 20, complains of stomach pains after breakfast. By noon he's shitting blood. Sunset finds him grey and still. The captain orders the body overboard immediately. Disease spreads fast in close quarters. You watch Geoffroy's corpse splash into the blue water. No ceremony, no prayer long enough to matter. The sea swallows him. You keep eating your ration of rotten pork. Storms strike without warning in late September. The ship rides waves like a toy, timbers groaning, water pouring through gaps in the deck. Below becomes a nightmare of sliding bodies, vomit, terror. You pray more in 3 hours of storm than in 3 years of Sunday Mass. The ship survives. 4 men don't, swept overboard or dead from injury when cargo breaks loose. Disease stalks the deck worse than any storm. Dysentery spreads through the close quarters like fire through dry grass. Men shit themselves where they stand, too weak to make it to the rail. The stench becomes normal. You stop noticing. A fever takes 5 more before you reach Cyprus. Their bodies join Geoffrey in the deep. The priest travelling with you grows hoarse from last rites. Cyprus offers a week's respite. You pay outrageous prices for fresh water and food. 3 more men desert here, disappearing into the port town. You lack the energy to pursue them. Bertrand says they're smarter than the rest of you. The old sergeant looks thinner, harder, his eyes holding knowledge he won't share. The final leg to Acre tests everyone's faith. Summer heat turns the hold into an oven. Men lie gasping, too exhausted to move. You lose track of days. Someone dies, you're not sure who, and the body sits for hours before anyone has strength to drag it topside. The captain threatens to dump live men overboard if disease doesn't stop spreading. You believe him. Palestine appears on the horizon like a fever dream. The coast shimmers in heat, golden and white and utterly foreign. Mountains rise in the distance, different from French peaks, starker, harder, ancient. The city of Acre sprawls along the harbour, its walls a mixture of European stone and something else, some Eastern influence you can't name. The heat hits when you disembark, not French summer warmth. A physical force that slaps you, steals your breath, makes armour burn against skin even through padding. You've never experienced anything like it. The sun hammers down from a sky bleached almost white. Within minutes, sweat soaks through every layer of clothing. The port reeks of humanity pressed too close. Spice markets mix with human waste, salt water, rotting fish, strange foods cooking over open flames. Languages you don't recognize assault your ears. Arabic, Greek, Armenian, Italian dialects. Eastern Christians in unfamiliar dress crowd alongside European crusaders. Buildings rise in styles that confuse the eye, arches and domes mixing with familiar European features. You count your remaining company on the dock. 37 left Burgundy. 22 stand in Acre. 15 dead. 3 deserted. The survivors look like animated corpses, gaunt, sick, traumatized. You paid a fortune and suffered 3 months of hell to deliver 22 men to the Holy Land. Bertrand grips your shoulder, his face grim. This was the easy part, he says. Now the real work starts. You've reached the Holy Land. The journey's horror supposed to be over. Instead, watching the alien city sprawl before you, breathing air thick with heat and foreign scents, you realize the truth. You've left behind everything you knew. The man who boarded that ship in Marseille no longer exists. What stands on this dock is something else, broken, reformed by suffering, utterly unprepared for what comes next. A Hospitaller knight approaches, his white surcoat marked with the 8-pointed cross. He speaks French with a strange accent, words clipped and efficient. He's been in Outremer for 12 years, his skin darker than any French peasant, face lined beyond his years. He looks at your company without sympathy. "Welcome to hell," he says. "Try not to die in the first week." The Hospitaller assigns Guillaume's company to Carac Castle, a fortress perched on a mountain ridge controlling the road between Damascus and Egypt. The journey inland reveals how little Guillaume understands this land. 3 days riding through terrain that shifts from coastal green to harsh brown hills. Villages appear and disappear, their inhabitants watching the Crusaders pass with expressions Guillaume can't read. Not fear, not welcome, something in between. The heat during the day makes armour impossible to wear. Guillaume learns this when one of his men collapses from heat stroke on the second day, the metal literally burning through his padded gambeson. They strip the armour off, revealing blistered skin underneath. The man survives but can't ride for a week. Local guides hired in Acre laugh at the Europeans, pointing to their own light robes and head coverings. Bertrand starts wrapping cloth around his helmet. Others follow. Carac rises from the landscape like a stone giant, its walls massive and forbidding. But approaching closer, Guillaume notices the architecture doesn't match anything he's seen in France. Arrow slits positioned at strange angles, rounded towers instead of square. Water channels cut into rock leading to massive cisterns. The castle built to fight in ways Guillaume never imagined. The garrison commander is a Poulain knight named Reynald de Chatillon's nephew, Gérard. 3rd generation born in Outremer. He speaks French but peppers it with Arabic words, his gestures more Eastern than European. Gérard wears a light linen surcoat over minimal armour, loose trousers instead of tight hose. His skin bronzed dark from decades under the Palestinian sun. Gérard inspects Guillaume's company with obvious disappointment. Fresh arrivals always the same, he explains. Heavy armour useless in the heat. Tactics designed for European warfare. No understanding of the enemy they'll face. Half will die in the first year from disease or stupidity. The rest might become actual fighters if they listen and adapt. The castle houses 200 men. 40 knights, the rest sergeants, Turcopole light cavalry, Armenian archers, local Christian infantry. Guillaume expected a purely European garrison. Instead, he finds a mixture of cultures and fighting styles that defies everything he thought he knew about crusading. Turcopoles fight for Christian lords but dress and ride like Saracens. Armenian mercenaries speak no French, communicate through gestures and translators. Even the European knights divide into factions, recent arrivals versus Poulain, different military orders competing for influence. The daily routine shocks Guillaume more than combat would. Dawn prayers followed by inspection of equipment. Armour must be oiled constantly, or rust appears overnight. Leather rots in the humidity. Wood warps. Metal fittings corrode. Maintenance consumes hours every day. Then guard duty on walls that radiate heat like bread ovens. Water rationed strictly. 1 skin per man per day for drinking, washing forbidden except once weekly. Food bears no resemblance to French cuisine. Flatbread instead of wheat loaves. Olives, dates, chickpeas cooked in oil. Lamb when available, never pork, despite this being Christian territory. The local Christians don't eat pork either, Guillaume discovers. Centuries living among Muslims change their habits. European crusaders who insist on familiar food sicken faster than those who adapt. Guillaume's first patrol leaves the castle on his 8th day at Carac. 15 men, half Turcopoles, riding south to check water sources and watch for Saracen raiders. The Turcopole captain, a lean man named Constantine, leads. He orders the European knights to ride in the centre, surrounded by lighter cavalry. Guillaume protests. Knights should form the vanguard. Constantine ignores him. The ambush comes 2 hours from the castle, arrows from a ridge, 20 Saracen light cavalry appearing as if from the ground itself. The Turcopoles wheel and scatter instantly, drawing the enemy into broken terrain. Guillaume charges with his knights, lances levelled, expecting the enemy to meet them. Instead, the Saracens retreat while shooting backwards from the saddle, their horses nimble and quick. Guillaume's destrier, bred for weight and power, can't match their speed. An arrow punches through the gap between Guillaume's shoulder plate and gorget. Pain explodes white-hot. He stays in the saddle through instinct, wheeling his horse as more arrows hiss past. His knights scatter, unable to close with an enemy that refuses to stand and fight. 3 men go down, horses screaming. The Saracens vanish into waders and gullies as suddenly as they appeared. Constantine's Turcopoles return, having circled behind the ambushers and killed 2. They strip the bodies efficiently, taking weapons, armour, coins. Constantine examines Guillaume's wound, pronounces it shallow, but infected dirt already visible around the puncture. He packs it with something that burns worse than the initial strike, crushed herbs mixed with wine. Guillaume nearly faints. The ride back to Carac teaches Guillaume his second lesson about warfare in Outremer. The 3 wounded knights, including himself, slow the entire patrol. Constantine wants to abandon the 2 more seriously injured men. They'll die anyway, and staying together risks the whole group. Gerard overrules him only because these men are newly arrived and killing them would hurt morale. But Guillaume sees the calculation in the Poulain commander's eyes. Men are resources here, measured against tactical necessity. The castle physician, a Syrian Christian named Yusuf, treats Guillaume's wound with techniques no European barber surgeon would recognize. He washes it with boiled water, applies a green paste that smells of rot, stitches it with hair-thin thread. Yusuf explains in broken French that arrows here carry dung or poison. Infection kills more men than the initial wound. Guillaume must drink water mixed with willow bark powder for the pain, and pray the flesh doesn't turn black. Fever hits that night. Guillaume sweats through his bedding, dreams of arrows falling like rain. He wakes to Bertrand forcing water down his throat. The old sergeant has seen this before in Spain. If the fever breaks in 3 days, Guillaume lives. If not, they'll dig another grave in the rocky soil outside the walls. The fever breaks on the 4th day. Guillaume wakes weak as a kitten, his shoulder a mass of angry red flesh but no black rot visible. Yusuf nods approval and changes the dressing. 12 men from the original company remain. 2 died on the journey from Acre, 1 from heat stroke, 3 in the ambush. 15 dead since leaving France. Guillaume has been in the Holy Land less than 2 weeks. Recovery takes another week. Guillaume watches the castle routine from the walls, beginning to understand the reality of Crusader life. Combat comes in brief, vicious encounters like the ambush. The rest is grinding survival against heat, disease, boredom. Knights gamble with dice and complain about their lords. Poulains speak Arabic with local merchants who somehow move freely between Christian and Muslim territory. Priests maintain the chapel, but half the garrison ignores services. Gerard finally explains the strategic situation. Saladin controls most of the territory around Carac. The castle exists as a Christian dagger pointed at the road between Damascus and Egypt, disrupting Muslim supply lines. Saladin wants it destroyed. He's besieged it twice already. The garrison's job involves holding this position, raiding enemy caravans, gathering intelligence. They're not here to liberate Jerusalem. They're here to survive and make Saladin's life difficult. We hope you have already subscribed to our channel, and if not, please do so right now. Our goal is to reach our first 1,000 subscribers. This is very important to us. Only on our channel will you find such interesting and unique stories about history. Subscribe so you don't miss them, and we'll get back to the story. Guillaume's wound heals enough for light duty by the end of his 3rd week. Gerard assigns him to learn from the Turcopoles, an insult no European knight should accept. But Guillaume accepts it, pride eroded by pain and fear. Constantine teaches him to ride lighter, react faster, think about terrain instead of just charging forward. European warfare involves heavy cavalry smashing into infantry lines. Here, the enemy refuses to form lines. They shoot from a distance, retreat, attack supply lines, ambush patrols. Fighting them requires different tactics. The education accelerates when a Saracen envoy arrives under a white flag. The man speaks to Gerard in fluent Arabic for an hour while Guillaume watches. Afterwards, Gerard explains the situation with obvious amusement. A local Muslim lord wants to negotiate passage for a caravan travelling north. He'll pay the garrison in gold for safe conduct through Christian territory. This happens monthly. Guillaume struggles to comprehend this. They're at war with the Saracens. How can they negotiate safe passage? Gerard's response strips away another layer of Guillaume's assumptions. War here isn't total. Truces happen constantly. Local lords on both sides maintain relationships because they'll be neighbours long after individual battles end. The Italian merchants in Acre trade with Muslim Damascus. Pilgrims travel to Jerusalem under negotiated safe conducts. The black and white religious war Guillaume imagined exists only in papal pronouncements. The caravan passes 3 days later. 50 camels loaded with goods, guarded by 20 Muslim soldiers and 10 of Kerach's Turcopoles. Guillaume rides with the escort, watching Christian and Muslim soldiers work together with professional efficiency. They camp together that night, the Muslims praying toward Mecca while the Christians maintain watch. No one tries to kill anyone. Guillaume speaks with one of the Muslim guards through a translator, learns the man has a wife and 3 daughters in Damascus, fights because his lord commands it, would rather be farming. This conversation breaks something in Guillaume's worldview. The Saracens aren't demons. They're men fighting for their land and faith, exactly as Guillaume fights for his. The realization doesn't make him question the crusade entirely, not yet. But it plants a seed of doubt that will grow. Guillaume transfers to Belvoir Castle after 2 months at Kerach, part of a garrison rotation designed to prevent men from forming dangerous local loyalties. Belvoir sits on a plateau overlooking the Jordan Valley, a hospitaller fortress built with mathematical precision, square within a square, concentric walls, towers positioned for overlapping fields of fire. The architecture represents decades of hard-won knowledge about defending against siege warfare. The summer heat in the Jordan Valley makes Kerach seem comfortable by comparison. Temperatures climb past anything Guillaume experienced in France. Standing guard duty in full armour becomes impossible. Men collapse within an hour, sometimes dying before anyone reaches them. The Hospitaller commander issues new rules: leather and padded cloth only during daylight hours, metal armour reserved for night watch and actual combat. Water dominates every decision at Belvoir. The fortress holds massive underground cisterns fed by elaborate channel systems, but summer drains them steadily. Each man receives 1 skin daily for drinking, washing clothes forbidden, bathing restricted to once every 2 weeks in water already used for other purposes. Guillaume learns to recognize dehydration in himself and others, the headaches, dark urine, confusion that precedes collapse. 3 men die from heat stroke in his first month despite precautions. The fortress sits isolated from any town, supplied by caravans from Acre every 6 weeks. Between supply runs, the garrison survives on stored grain, dried meat, dates, olives preserved in salt. Fresh food becomes a memory. Bread baked in outdoor ovens turns stale within days. Meat spoils despite salting. Guillaume watches rats grow fat on food stores while men waste away. The castle cats, valued higher than most soldiers, hunt constantly, but can't keep up with the rodent population. Disease spreads through the close quarters with horrifying regularity. Dysentery strikes in waves, leaving men shitting blood and too weak to stand. The castle latrine, a hole cut through the outer wall, becomes a place of misery and humiliation. Guillaume contracts it in his second month, spends 5 days certain he'll die. The Hospitaller infirmarian treats him with boiled rice water and prayers. 10 men in the garrison don't survive. Their bodies go into a mass grave outside the walls, the rocky soil too hard for individual plots. The garrison's composition reveals the Crusader state's desperate reality. 40 Hospitaller knights form the core, bound by their monastic vows and iron discipline. Then come 60 sergeants, professional soldiers from across Europe. 50 Turcopole cavalry, mostly local Christians and converts who fight in Eastern style. 30 Armenian archers, mercenaries paid in silver and plunder rights. 20 local Christian infantry, Syrian and Greek Orthodox, who speak no French and keep to themselves. The mixing of cultures creates constant friction. Europeans look down on Easterners. Different Christian denominations barely tolerate each other. Competition for status breeds fights. Guillaume's equipment deteriorates faster than he can maintain it. His mail hauberk rusts despite daily oiling, the coastal humidity penetrating every link. Leather straps on his shield rot and snap. His sword's wooden grip swells and cracks. The intense sun warps his lance shaft. Metal fittings on his saddle corrode. He spends hours each day on maintenance that would take minutes in France's dry climate. Other knights abandon their heaviest armour entirely, adopting the lighter gear poulains prefer. Guard duty in summer becomes an endurance test. 4-hour shifts on walls that radiate heat like forge metal. The stone too hot to touch with bare hands. Guillaume learns to wrap his palms in cloth before gripping his spear. Sweat pours constantly, soaking through padding, causing rashes and infections. The sun bleaches colour from fabric and skin alike. Guillaume's face darkens to bronze, burns and peels repeatedly. Looking at his reflection in polished metal, he barely recognises himself. The nights bring different torture. Temperatures drop, but humidity remains crushing. Insects swarm from the valley below, mosquitoes, biting flies, things Guillaume has no names for. They get into bedding, armour, food stores. Men wake covered in welts, scratching until they bleed. The Hospitallers burn herbs that produce thick smoke, offering temporary relief but making breathing difficult. Guillaume develops a constant cough from the smoke, joins a chorus of hacking men each morning. Food preparation reveals another level of grinding difficulty. Cooking must happen before dawn or after sunset to avoid the worst heat. Fires kept small to conserve wood. Every tree within miles already cut down for previous garrisons. The cooks, local Christians who know the climate, prepare food Guillaume initially refuses to eat. Lentils boiled with strange spices. Flatbread so tough it must be soaked in water. Vegetables pickled in brine that burns the throat. He eats it anyway after watching men who cling to European diets sicken and die. The isolation weighs heavier than the heat. Belvoir sits a day's hard ride from any friendly settlement. No women except 2 laundresses, widows of dead crusaders who stay because returning to Europe means destitution. No entertainment beyond dice and the occasional minstrel travelling with supply caravans. Books exist only in the chapel. Religious texts Guillaume has already memorised. Boredom becomes an enemy as dangerous as Saracen raiders. Guillaume discovers many knights keep local mistresses in nearby villages, visiting during leave rotations. The church forbids it. The Hospitaller Grand Master threatens excommunication. Everyone does it anyway. Some knights marry local Christian women, creating families that bridge two worlds. Their children, the poulains, belong fully to neither Europe nor the East. Guillaume watches these mixed families with fascination and growing understanding. This land changes everyone who stays. The castle's architecture, initially impressive, reveals itself as a monument to paranoia. Every design element reflects bitter experience with siege warfare. Wells sunk deep into bedrock, protected by multiple defensive layers. Grain storage spread across different chambers so fire can't destroy everything. Multiple escape routes through the walls in case the fortress falls. Murder holes above every passage. Arrow slits positioned to create kill zones. Living here means dwelling in a machine designed for organized violence. Training continues despite the heat, adapted to local realities. Morning drills before the sun rises too high. Knights practice fighting in lighter armor, learning to move fast instead of relying on metal protection. The Turcopole captain teaches them to shoot from horseback, a skill European knights consider beneath their dignity. Guillaume attempts it anyway, discovers it requires different horsemanship than jousting. His first 20 arrows miss completely. By the 50th attempt, he hits a target once. Combat medicine at Belvoir operates on principles that horrify Guillaume initially, but make sense after seeing results. Yusuf, the same Syrian physician from Kerak now rotating through different fortresses, cauterizes wounds with red-hot metal. He amputates limbs infected beyond saving, cutting through bone with a serrated blade while men scream. He uses stitches made from catgut, compresses soaked in wine, powders ground from desert plants Guillaume doesn't recognize. His success rate exceeds any European barber surgeon Guillaume encountered. The garrison conducts raids every few weeks, hitting Muslim supply caravans or small settlements. Guillaume participates in 3 during his time at Belvoir. The raids follow a brutal pattern: fast approach using Turcopole scouts, sudden strike at dawn, grab whatever can be carried, retreat before reinforcements arrive. Prisoners taken for ransom if noble, killed if common soldiers. Villages burned to deny the enemy resources. Guillaume kills 4 men during these raids, their faces joining the growing collection in his nightmares. Payment arrives irregularly, sometimes months late. Knights owed their feudal obligations received nothing beyond food and shelter. Sergeants and mercenaries promised silver often get promissory notes instead. The Hospitallers, funded by European donations, pay more reliably than secular lords. This creates resentment. Professional soldiers fight better when actually paid. Guillaume watches 2 mercenary companies desert after 3 months without wages, disappearing into the countryside to become bandits or switch sides. The casual cruelty of garrison life shocks Guillaume despite months of exposure. Men beat servants for minor infractions. Knights abuse their authority over common soldiers. The strong prey on the weak in 100 petty ways. Gambling debts lead to violence. Accusations of cowardice or theft result in beatings or mutilation. The Hospitaller commander maintains order through force, punishing troublemakers with whipping, imprisonment, or expulsion from the fortress. Guillaume witnesses a sergeant hanged for stealing food from stores, his body left dangling as a warning. Religious observance declines in direct proportion to time spent in Outremer. Fresh arrivals attend chapel daily, pray constantly, treat the crusade as a holy mission. Veterans skip services, curse God casually, treat warfare as a job rather than a calling. The chaplain's sermons about sacred duty fall on increasingly deaf ears. Guillaume finds his own faith eroding, worn away by heat and violence and the grinding reality that God seems equally absent from both Christian and Muslim prayers. Supply caravans bring news from the wider Crusader world, usually bad. Saladin consolidating power across Syria and Egypt. Christian states losing territory steadily. Antioch under pressure. Tripoli barely holding. Jerusalem's kingdom shrinking to a coastal strip. Each report makes clear the Crusader states are dying, sustained only by periodic reinforcements from Europe. Guillaume realizes he's defending an enterprise in terminal decline, a European fantasy maintained at enormous cost in blood and gold. The 4th month at Belvoir brings the first signs of larger trouble. Scouts report unusual Saracen activity, troops massing, supply convoys moving north, emirs gathering for council. The Hospitaller commander sends urgent messages to Jerusalem warning of a potential major offensive. The response orders Belvoir to maintain position and await reinforcement. None comes. Guillaume understands the implication. If Saladin strikes, Belvoir will face the assault alone. Guillaume's first true battle comes near Tiberias in early spring, when Belvoir's garrison rides out to intercept a Saracen raiding force threatening Galilean villages. 60 Christian knights and 100 light cavalry against an estimated 80 Mamluk warriors. The Mamluks, slave soldiers trained from childhood in warfare, represent Saladin's elite forces, far more dangerous than the tribal cavalry Guillaume faced in earlier skirmishes. The armies meet on open ground near the lake, terrain that favours neither side. Guillaume rides in the second rank of the Christian charge, lance couched, finally experiencing the type of combat he trained for in France. The initial impact smashes through the Mamluk front line. Guillaume's lance punches through a soldier's chest, the shock travelling up his arm, the man's weight nearly dragging him from the saddle. He releases the lance, draws his sword, hacks at a face beneath a pointed helmet. The battle devolves into chaos within minutes. The Mamluks, instead of breaking, reform and counterattack with disciplined precision. Their curved swords slash at horses' legs, targeting mounts rather than armoured riders. Guillaume's destrier screams and goes down, an artery severed. He hits the ground hard, armour absorbing the impact but driving air from his lungs. A Mamluk soldier closes in, sword raised. Guillaume rolls, his own blade catching the man's knee, cutting through muscle to bone. The man falls. Guillaume scrambles up, drives his sword through the gap between helmet and mail collar. The resistance of flesh, the grating of steel on bone, the hot spray of blood. These sensations burn into Guillaume's memory with perfect clarity. The man's eyes meet his for an instant, wide with shock and pain, then nothing. Guillaume has killed his first man in close combat. The battle swings back and forth for an hour. Neither side can gain decisive advantage. Dead and wounded litter the ground. Guillaume fights on foot, part of a shrinking knot of Christian knights surrounded by Mamluk cavalry. Bertrand appears at his shoulder, the old sergeant's sword red to the hilt, his face spattered with other men's blood. They fight back to back, holding position until the Hospitaller commander signals retreat. The withdrawal happens in stages, each group of knights covering the others. The Mamluks pursue, but without the fury Guillaume expected. Their commander lets the Christians disengage, content with controlling the field. Guillaume stumbles away from the battlefield in a daze, his armour dented, his sword notched, his hands shaking so badly he can barely grip the reins of a captured horse. 23 Christians dead, 40 wounded. The Mamluks lost perhaps 30 men. No one won. The return to Belvoir takes 2 days, the wounded slowing the column. Guillaume can't stop seeing the Mamluk soldier's face, the moment when life left his eyes. That night he vomits his rations, overcome by delayed reaction. Bertrand tells him it gets easier. Guillaume isn't sure whether that's reassuring or horrifying. The aftermath brings unexpected developments. A Mamluk envoy arrives at Belvoir under truce flag 3 days later. The enemy commander proposes an exchange. Christian prisoners for Muslims, one-to-one trade, no ransom required. The Hospitaller commander agrees. Guillaume watches 15 captured Mamluks walk out of the fortress, while 15 Christian soldiers walk in, the transaction handled with formal courtesy on both sides. One of the returned Christians, a sergeant named Robert from Normandy, explains his treatment in captivity. The Mamluks fed him, tended his wounds, kept him with other Christian prisoners. No torture, no forced conversion. Professional soldiers treating prisoners as a resource to be traded later. Robert admits they treated him better than some Christian lords treat their own men. The revelation disturbs Guillaume's understanding of the conflict. Enemies who negotiate truces, trade prisoners, observe rules of warfare. These aren't the demonic hordes described in French churches. They're organised, disciplined, often more honourable than supposedly Christian knights Guillaume has met. A month later, Guillaume escorts a merchant caravan travelling from Acre to Damascus, part of a combined Christian-Muslim guard force arranged through negotiation between local lords. 20 Christian soldiers, 20 Muslim soldiers, protecting Italian merchants who pay both sides. The journey takes a week through territory, claimed by neither side exclusively. Guillaume rides alongside a Mamluk officer named Khalil for 3 days. Communication happens through a Poulan translator, halting but increasingly detailed. Khalil speaks of his training in Cairo, purchased as a boy from Turkish slave markets, raised to fight for Islam with the same fervour Guillaume was raised to fight for Christ. He's 32, a veteran of a dozen battles, survivor of 2 sieges. He has a wife in Damascus, no children yet, prays 5 times daily with the same devotion Guillaume once brought to Mass. They discuss tactics during the long hours of riding. Khalil explains Mamluk training, archery from horseback starting at age 7, swordwork at 10, lance at 12. Every Mamluk must master all weapons, ride for days without rest, function on minimal food and water. Their discipline exceeds any European force Guillaume has encountered. Khalil speaks with professional respect about Christian heavy cavalry charges, admits they're devastating when they connect. But he also points out their limitations: slow to manoeuvre, vulnerable to archery, exhausted quickly in the heat. Guillaume asks through the translator why Khalil fights. The answer comes simply: this is Muslim land, taken by Christian invaders who claim divine right to territory they never inhabited. Khalil fights to defend his home, his faith, his people. The parallel to Guillaume's own justifications for crusading couldn't be clearer. Both men believe God sanctions their cause. Both can't be right. The caravan camps together each night, Christians and Muslims maintaining separate fires but sharing guard duty. Guillaume watches the Muslims pray toward Mecca at sunset, their movements synchronized, voices rising in Arabic prayer. The devotion appears genuine, their faith as strong as any Christian's. He struggles to reconcile this with decades of preaching about Muslim heresy and evil. A bandit attack on the 4th day forces Christians and Muslims to fight together. 30 raiders strike at dawn, targeting the merchant wagons. The combined guard responds instantly, Khalil's men taking the left flank while Guillaume's group charges the right. The bandits break under coordinated assault, flee into the hills. 5 raiders dead, 2 captured, no losses among the guards. Khalil and Guillaume coordinate the pursuit through the translator with professional efficiency. That evening, Khalil shares his rations with Guillaume: dried dates, unleavened bread, water from his skin. They sit by the fire, 2 enemies in a temporary alliance, discussing warfare and weather, and the casual matters soldiers everywhere recognize. Guillaume realizes he likes Khalil, respects him as a warrior and man. This thought would have been impossible 4 months ago. The caravan reaches Damascus 2 days later. Guillaume receives permission to enter the city for the afternoon, escorted by Khalil, who vouches for his safety. Damascus explodes Guillaume's conception of Muslim civilization. The markets overflow with goods from across the known world: Chinese silk, Indian spices, African ivory, European metalwork. Libraries house thousands of manuscripts. Public baths serve rich and poor alike. Gardens bloom with flowers Guillaume has never seen. The architecture soars in ways that make European castles seem crude. Khalil takes Guillaume to a madrasa, an Islamic school, where scholars debate philosophy and mathematics. The students study Greek texts in Arabic translation, works lost to Europe but preserved here. Guillaume, educated in basic Latin by monastery monks, feels intellectually outmatched. These Muslims possess knowledge Europeans forgot centuries ago. The visit shatters Guillaume's final assumptions about cultural superiority. The Crusades framed as bringing civilization to barbarians. Damascus proves that lie. This city was ancient and sophisticated when Guillaume's ancestors were painting themselves blue in northern forests. The Muslim world doesn't need European culture. If anything, Europe needs theirs. The return journey passes in contemplative silence. Guillaume processes what he's seen and learned. The Saracens aren't monsters. They're people defending their homeland from foreign invasion. Their religion, while different from Christianity, inspires the same devotion. Their civilization in many ways exceeds Europe's. The Crusades' moral foundation crumbles under the weight of direct experience. Back at Belvoir, Guillaume tries explaining his revelations to other knights. The Poulains nod knowingly. They've understood this for years. Recent arrivals accuse Guillaume of going native, losing his faith, betraying Christ. A Hospitaller chaplain warns him against the sin of relativism. Guillaume stops talking about it, but the knowledge remains, growing like a tumour in his certainty. A formal truce is declared in June, negotiated between Saladin and the Christian kingdoms. Trade resumes. Pilgrims travel to Jerusalem under negotiated safe passage. Raiding continues in disputed territories, but major battles cease. Guillaume participates in his first joint Christian-Muslim patrol, enforcing the truce against bandits and rogue elements on both sides. The absurdity of yesterday's enemies cooperating as today's allies stops bothering him. Nothing makes sense here. That's the only truth he's certain of. The summer brings another revelation. A Hospitaller knight at Belvoir maintains a mistress in a nearby village, a Muslim woman, daughter of a local elder. Their relationship violates every rule of the military order and Christian-Muslim interaction. Everyone knows. No one officially acknowledges it. When questioned privately, the knight explains simply, "He's been in Outremer 12 years, will likely die here, sees no reason to live without companionship." His faith and his humanity exist in separate compartments. Guillaume understands this compromise now. The crusade as theological abstraction versus the crusade as lived reality. In theory, Christians and Muslims wage holy war for God. In practice, they negotiate, trade, occasionally befriend each other, find ways to survive in shared territory. The grand religious narrative sustains policy and propaganda. Individual humans make smaller, more practical arrangements. By summer's end, Guillaume has killed 8 men in battle and negotiated with dozens more in truces. He's fought alongside Muslims against bandits and against Muslims in territorial disputes. He's prayed in Christian chapels and watched Muslim prayers with respect rather than contempt. The man who landed at Acre 6 months ago believed in absolute moral clarity. That man is dead. What remains is harder, wiser, infinitely more uncertain about everything except the desire to survive. The summons reaches Belvoir in late September. All available forces to reinforce Kerak, besieged by Saladin's army with 12,000 men. Guillaume's stomach drops at the number. Kerak's garrison holds barely 300 defenders. The Hospitaller commander dispatches 40 knights and 80 support troops, knowing this token force changes nothing strategically, but honour demands the gesture. The relief column finds Saladin's army encamped around Kerak like a city of tents, stretching across the landscape farther than Guillaume can see. Siege engines cluster near the walls, trebuchets, mangonels, battering rams under protective sheds. Muslim engineers dig mines beneath the fortifications. The scale dwarfs anything Guillaume witnessed in France. This isn't a raid or border skirmish. This is industrial warfare. The relief force breaks through the siege lines at dawn, exploiting a gap in the encirclement. The manoeuvre costs 12 men but succeeds in reaching the castle gates. Guillaume rides through them as arrows rain down, the massive doors slamming shut behind the last horseman. He's inside Kerak again. This time he might never leave. The castle shows 6 weeks of siege damage. Trebuchet stones have smashed sections of the outer wall. Towers lean at dangerous angles. The courtyard cratered from impacts. Gérard, the Poulain commander, Guillaume met months ago, looks like he's aged a decade. His eyes carry the hollow exhaustion of a man who hasn't slept properly since the siege began. Food stores already running low. The garrison placed on half rations 2 weeks earlier. Water consumption restricted even further than normal. 1 cup per man per day for drinking, none for washing. The cisterns can sustain current levels another 6 weeks at most. After that, surrender or death from thirst. The bombardment resumes at first light. Trebuchet stones weighing 300 pounds arc through the sky, crashing into walls with sounds like thunder. The impacts shake the entire fortress. Guillaume learns to recognise the rhythm. The crack of the counterweight releasing, 2 seconds of flight, then the devastating crash. Day and night without pause, sleep becomes impossible. Men walk around in a daze, flinching at each impact. The first serious breach opens in the outer wall on Guillaume's 3rd day inside. A section 20 feet wide collapses, stones tumbling down the slope. Muslim infantry rushes the gap immediately. The garrison meets them in the rubble, fighting hand to hand amid the fallen masonry. Guillaume kills 3 men in the breach, his sword breaking on the 4th strike against a helmet. He grabs a fallen mace, continues fighting with the unfamiliar weapon. The assault lasts 2 hours before the Muslims withdraw, leaving 30 dead in the gap. The Christians lose 18. Repairs begin immediately using rubble from damaged sections. Men work through the night by torchlight, stacking stones, packing gaps with smaller rocks and mortar. Muslim archers harass them constantly. 7 workers die before dawn. The breach partially filled but remains the wall's weakest point. Disease spreads faster than in normal garrison conditions. Men packed tight in the inner fortress, unable to maintain even basic hygiene. Water too precious for washing. Latrines overflow, waste accumulating in corners. Dysentery strikes first, then typhus carried by lice thriving in the filth. Guillaume contracts it in the 2nd week, spends 3 days in delirium. He recovers because he's young and strong. Older men aren't so lucky. 12 die in 5 days, their bodies thrown over the wall at night to avoid the smell and disease. The siege engines pummel the fortress with mechanical precision. Saladin's engineers know their craft. They concentrate fire on specific sections until they collapse, then move to the next target. A tower on the southwest corner takes sustained bombardment for 4 days. Cracks spread through the masonry like veins. On the 5th day it topples outward, killing 2 defenders inside and opening another breach. The Muslims pour through immediately. This assault lasts all day. The garrison fights from inner walls, raining arrows and stones on attackers trapped in the confined space, between outer and inner fortifications. Guillaume marks a position on the inner wall, dropping rocks on Muslim soldiers below. One catches a man directly on the head, crushing his skull like an egg. Guillaume watches the body convulse and go still. He feels nothing anymore. Death has become routine. The Muslims withdraw at sunset, unable to breach the inner wall. They've gained the outer courtyard, but at enormous cost. Bodies pile 3 deep in places. Christian losses lighter but unsustainable given the garrison's size. 47 dead, 63 wounded, many of those certain to die from infection. The defenders can't absorb many more assaults like this. Greek fire appears on the 10th day of Guillaume's siege. Muslim engineers launch clay pots filled with the incendiary mixture via trebuchet. The pots shatter on impact, liquid fire spreading across stone and wood. Water doesn't extinguish it. The fire burns hotter when doused. 3 men catch fire in the first attack, running and screaming until they die, or others smother the flames with dirt. The smell of burned flesh permeates the fortress for days. One pot crashes through the roof of a storage building, setting grain supplies ablaze. The garrison forms bucket chains trying to extinguish it, failing, watching months of food turn to ash and smoke. Gerard calculates they've lost 1/3 of remaining stores. Rations cut to 1/4 portions. Men grow gaunt and weak. The strongest receive slightly larger shares to maintain fighting capability. The wounded and sick get less. Some die from starvation before their injuries can kill them. Guillaume participates in a desperate sortie to destroy a siege engine. 20 knights charge out a sally port at midnight, hoping darkness provides cover. They reach the trebuchet, set it ablaze with oil and torches. Muslim guards respond instantly. The fighting turns vicious in the darkness, friend and foe impossible to distinguish. Guillaume takes a sword cut across his thigh, feels bone but fights on driven by terror. The sortie retreats, having destroyed 1 engine at the cost of 11 men. The Muslims build a replacement within 3 days. Mining becomes the greatest threat. Muslim engineers tunnel beneath the walls, shoring up the tunnels with timber. Once they've excavated far enough, they'll burn the supports and collapse the tunnel, bringing down the wall above. The defenders dig countermines trying to intercept the enemy tunnels. Guillaume volunteers for mining duty despite his wounded leg. The work happens in near total darkness, men digging through solid rock with hand tools. Cave-ins kill 2 miners. Breaking through into an enemy tunnel results in underground combat, men fighting with knives in spaces too cramped for swords. The mines succeed on the 18th day. A section of the north wall drops suddenly, the ground beneath it collapsed by a burned-out tunnel. The breach spans 40 feet, completely impassable. Muslim forces mass for a major assault. Guillaume and every able-bodied defender man the inner walls. This attack, if successful, means the fortress falls. The assault begins at dawn with a massive bombardment. Every siege engine fires simultaneously, suppressing defensive positions. Muslim infantry swarms through the breach, climbing over rubble, shields raised against arrow fire. They reach the inner wall, plant scaling ladders, begin climbing. Guillaume fights at the top of a ladder, stabbing down at faces appearing over the parapet. His spear punctures an eye, a throat, a chest. Bodies fall. More climb. A Muslim soldier reaches the parapet. Guillaume drives his spear through the man's belly, but the shaft breaks. The soldier dying grabs Guillaume and pulls him over the edge. They fall together, crashing onto the rubble below. Guillaume lands on the Muslim's body, the impact driving remaining air from the man's lungs. Guillaume rolls away, his wounded leg screaming. A sword thrust misses his head by inches. He crawls behind fallen stones as fighting rages above. Bertrand finds him an hour later, after the assault breaks and Muslims retreat. The old sergeant drags Guillaume back inside the inner fortress, into the keep where the wounded accumulate. Yusuf examines Guillaume's leg, pronounces the bone intact but the muscle severely damaged. He stitches the wound with catgut, offers Guillaume wine mixed with poppy for the pain. Guillaume drinks, descends into grey unconsciousness. He wakes to Gerard standing over him. The Poulain commander looks ready to collapse himself. The assault failed, but barely. The garrison lost 70 men, leaving fewer than 200 effective defenders. Water will run out in 2 weeks, food in 3. The wounded consume resources while unable to fight. Gerard states the brutal mathematics. If a third of the wounded die quickly, the rest might last another week. That night, Guillaume overhears Gerard negotiating surrender terms with Saladin's envoy. The Muslim commander offers generous conditions. The garrison can leave with weapons and personal possessions. Christian civilians in the castle will not be harmed. Wounded will receive medical treatment. Ransom required only for nobles, common soldiers free to go. Gerard requests time to consider, knowing he has no real choice. The decision tears the garrison apart. Hospitaller knights swear their order forbids surrender while still capable of fighting. Some suggest killing the wounded to extend supplies. Others advocate a suicidal final charge. Gerard overrules all objections with cold pragmatism. Continuing the siege kills everyone for no strategic gain. Kerak will fall eventually anyway. Preserving the garrison's fighting men serves the Crusader cause better than pointless martyrdom. Surrender formalized 2 days later. The gates open. Saladin's troops enter but maintain perfect discipline. No looting, no rape, no massacre. Muslim physicians treat Christian wounded. Saladin provides water and food to the starved garrison. He personally meets with Gerard, exchanges courteous words through translators, even jokes about the stubbornness of the defence. Guillaume watches this with profound confusion. The same commander who bombarded them for 6 weeks now shows mercy that exceeds most Christian lords' treatment of surrendered enemies. Saladin releases common soldiers immediately, requests only modest ransoms for knights. He allows the garrison to march out with military honours, weapons in hand, banners flying. The column departs Kerak 3 days after surrender. Guillaume limps along, supported by Bertrand watching the fortress recede. 200 men entered with the relief force, 73 leave, the rest dead or too wounded to travel. He survived another siege. The cost grows harder to calculate each time. Guillaume spends 3 months recovering in Acre, his leg healing poorly, infection setting in twice before finally clearing. By March 1187 he can walk without support, though pain radiates through the limb after any exertion. The Hospitaller physicians tell him he'll never ride properly again. 2 weeks later he's back in the saddle, ignoring the agony, refusing to become one of the crippled veterans begging in coastal cities. News from the interior grows progressively worse through spring. Saladin consolidates his position, capturing Christian fortresses one by one. Reynald de Chatillon, the infamous raider, breaks a truce by attacking a Muslim caravan, personally torturing Saladin's sister who travelled with it. The act guarantees war. Saladin swears an oath to kill Reynald personally. Guillaume, now understanding the delicate balance of truces and treaties, recognises the catastrophe this represents. Reynald has destroyed years of careful diplomacy for personal profit. Saladin's response comes in July, with an army of 30,000 marching on Tiberias. King Guy of Jerusalem musters the Christian field army, 1,200 knights, 15,000 infantry, the largest force the Crusader states have assembled in years. Every available fighting man receives summons. Guillaume rides with the Hospitaller contingent, his leg wrapped tight, jaw clenched against constant pain. The army gathers at Sephoria, a well-watered camp near Nazareth. The The Christian force impressive, but everyone knows Saladin's army larger and better supplied. The strategic debate splits the war council. Raymond of Tripoli, experienced in eastern warfare, advocates defensive strategy. Let Saladin besiege Tiberias while the Christian army maintains position at water sources. Force the Muslims to attack uphill against prepared positions. Reynald and Gerard de Riedefort, the Templar Grand Master, demand immediate advance to relieve Tiberias, calling Raymond a coward for suggesting otherwise. King Guy, weak and indecisive, wavers between the two positions. The argument consumes 2 days while Saladin tightens his siege of Tiberias. Political considerations override military sense. Guy fears looking cowardly more than he fears tactical disaster. He orders the advance on July 3rd. Raymond protests one final time, predicting catastrophe. The king ignores him. The army marches at dawn into the worst mistake in Crusader history. The route to Tiberias crosses 16 miles of waterless terrain in the peak of summer. Guillaume understands the danger immediately. Men and horses will be exhausted and desperately thirsty before engaging the enemy. The Hospitaller Marshal voices the same concern. Gerard de Riedefort dismisses it, claiming God will provide. The heat strikes like a physical assault within the first hour. Temperature climbs past anything Guillaume has experienced even in the Jordan Valley. Men begin drinking their water rations immediately, unable to help themselves. Armour becomes unbearable. Knights strip off mail, reduced to padded gambesons and helmets. The infantry suffers worse. Common soldiers carry heavier loads, receive smaller water rations, lack horses to ease the burden. Saladin's light cavalry appears by mid-morning, harassing the column's flanks. They don't engage directly, just ride close enough to launch arrows, then retreat when the Christians respond. The tactics force the Crusader army to maintain battle formation instead of marching efficiently. Progress slows to a crawl. Water supplies dwindle. Men start collapsing from heat stroke. By noon, the situation turns desperate. Guillaume's water skin empty, his tongue swollen, head pounding. Around him, knights slide from saddles too weak to continue. The infantry breaks formation, men stumbling toward mirages promising water that doesn't exist. Muslim arrows fall constantly now, killing men too exhausted to raise shields. The column fragments, cohesion dissolving under heat and thirst and mounting casualties. The Christian commanders recognize their trap too late. They're strung across miles of barren hillside, no water available, Muslim forces gathering in overwhelming numbers. Retreat back to Sephoria would mean running a gauntlet while the army disintegrates. Advancing to Tiberias means fighting through Saladin's entire army, while the Christians can barely stand. The only option is camping here and hoping to reach water tomorrow. The army staggers to halt near the village of Hattin, clustered around 2 hills called the Horns. Saladin's forces encircle them completely by sunset. Guillaume watches Muslim campfires spread across the landscape in every direction, thousands of them, surrounding 12,000 Christians who have no water and no escape. The trap is complete. The night passes in agony. No water, no food for most. Guillaume chews dried meat that turns to paste in his parched mouth, impossible to swallow. Men descend into delirium, some wandering toward Muslim lines begging for water, cut down by arrows. Others drink their own urine or horse blood. The nobles debate options, arriving at no consensus. Some advocate breaking out at dawn, fighting through the encirclement. Others suggest a last stand on the high ground. All the options end in death. Guillaume doesn't sleep. His leg throbs. His thirst becomes all-consuming, worse than any wound he suffered. He watches the stars wheel overhead, listening to men moan and pray and slowly lose their minds. Bertrand sits beside him, the old sergeant silent, conserving moisture. They both know they'll likely die tomorrow. Dawn brings no relief, just another day of brutal heat. Saladin's forces attack at first light, not with a general assault but with systematic destruction. Muslim archers rain arrows into the packed Christian formations. Infantry can't charge across open ground. They're too weak, too thirsty, dropping from heat stroke before reaching the enemy. The knights mount a desperate cavalry charge downhill, Guillaume among them, knowing it's futile but having no alternative. The charge breaks against prepared Muslim positions like waves on rock. Saladin's forces simply part, let the exhausted knights thunder past, then close behind them. Guillaume's horse stumbles, goes down. He hits the ground hard, armour driving the impact deep into his body. A Muslim soldier looms above him. Guillaume raises his sword but lacks strength to swing it effectively. The blade deflects off a shield. A mace crashes into his helmet and the world goes white. He wakes to smoke filling his lungs. The Muslims have set the dry brush on fire upwind of the Christian positions. Smoke billows across the hillside, blinding defenders, adding suffocation to thirst and exhaustion. Guillaume crawls through the haze, finds Bertrand already dead, an arrow through his throat. The old sergeant's eyes stare at nothing. Guillaume closes them with shaking hands. The battle, such as it is, lasts 4 hours. No real fighting, just systematic slaughter of men too weak to resist. Some Christians surrender immediately, others fight until they collapse. The horns of Hattin become a charnel house, thousands of bodies scattered across burned earth. Guillaume fights until a Muslim soldier knocks the sword from his numb hands. He surrenders because continuing means death, and some animal survival instinct persists despite everything. The prisoners gather in groups stripped of weapons and armour. Guillaume counts perhaps 3,000 Christians still alive from an army of 12,000. King Guy captured, Raymond of Tripoli escaped somehow, most of the nobility taken for ransom. The infantry dead almost to a man. Common soldiers have no ransom value, so the Muslims killed them efficiently. The true cross, the holy relic the Crusader army carried into battle, now sits in Muslim hands. Guillaume watches Saladin's soldiers parade it through their camp upside down, the ultimate humiliation. The bishop who carried it into battle kneels weeping. The defeat is total, catastrophic, civilization ending for the Crusader states. Saladin arrives to inspect the prisoners personally. Guillaume sees him for the first time, a man in his 50s, unremarkable in appearance, wearing simple robes. This is the warrior who just destroyed the Crusader field army. He walks among the prisoners with guards, stops before King Guy and Reynold de Chatillon. Water brought for the king. Saladin offers it personally, a gesture of mercy. Then Saladin turns to Reynold. Guillaume can't hear the words but sees the Sultan's face harden. Saladin draws his sword, strikes Reynold down personally, fulfilling his oath. The body twitches and goes still. Guards drag it away. King Guy recoils in terror, believing he's next. Saladin speaks to him. Guillaume learns. Later he said kings don't kill kings. Guy is safe. But Reynold broke the fundamental rules of warfare and truces. He earned execution. The Templar and Hospitaller knights received no such mercy. Saladin orders all military order knights executed. They've sworn to fight Islam until death, so death is what they'll receive. 230 knights lined up. Muslim soldiers behead them one by one, methodical and efficient. Guillaume watches from 30 yards away, forced to witness. The men die well, most without begging. Their heads pile up as the sun climbs higher. Guillaume survives because he's secular nobility with ransom value. He's herded with other prisoners, given water finally, enough to prevent death but not enough to satisfy thirst. They march away from Hattin under guard, leaving the battlefield to carrion birds already gathering. The Crusader field army has ceased to exist. Jerusalem now lies defenceless. The march to Damascus takes a week. Guillaume walks in chains, his leg agony with every step. Half the prisoners die on the road from wounds or exhaustion. Muslim guards prevent the worst abuses but offer no help to the weak. Bodies left where they fall. Guillaume survives through pure stubbornness, refusing to die on a roadside after surviving Hattin itself. Damascus receives the prisoners with celebration. Crowds gather to watch the defeated Crusaders paraded through streets. Some throw refuse, others just stare. Guillaume sees triumph in their eyes and understands it. For decades, these people lived under threat of Christian invasion. Now they've won decisively. He would celebrate too in their position. The prison camp outside Damascus holds thousands. Conditions brutal but not deliberately cruel. Prisoners receive food and water, shelter from the sun, medical treatment for serious wounds. The Muslims simply lack resources to properly care for so many captives. Men die daily from infection, disease, despair. Guillaume's leg finally receives proper treatment from a Muslim physician who cleans the festering wound, applies treatments that slowly reduce the swelling. Ransom negotiations begin within weeks. Guillaume's family in France contacted through intermediaries. The amount demanded, 300 gold bezants, represents more than his remaining inheritance is worth. His father sends word through a Templar banker. The family will pay 100, not a coin more. Guillaume understands the message. Pierre has convinced the old man that Guillaume's crusading folly deserves no reward. He'll rot in prison or find another way out. 4 months pass in the camp. Guillaume watches the seasons change, sees other prisoners ransomed and released while he remains. The guards treat him decently enough, recognizing him as a skilled fighter who might be worth more alive than dead. A Muslim emir makes an offer: convert to Islam, swear service to Saladin, receive immediate freedom and employment. Guillaume considers it seriously for the first time in his life. His faith, once absolute, now seems flexible. But he refuses, not from piety but from simple stubbornness. He's lost too much to abandon the last piece of his identity. Release comes unexpectedly in February 1188, not through ransom but exchange. Saladin trades several hundred prisoners for a much smaller number of high-ranking Muslim captives. Guillaume included almost by accident, his name on a list of knights, his status inflated by bureaucratic error. He walks out of the prison camp barely believing his freedom. The world beyond the gates has changed completely. Jerusalem fell to Saladin in October, while Guillaume rotted in prison. The entire Crusader kingdom collapsed like a house of cards without its field army. Only Tyre and a few coastal fortresses remain in Christian hands. The Crusader states that endured for 90 years effectively destroyed in 6 months. Guillaume makes his way to Tyre, the last major stronghold, arriving to find it crowded with refugees and desperate defenders. The catastrophe of Hattin has killed more than an army. It's killed the Crusader dream itself. What remains is survival, nothing more. Guillaume reaches Jerusalem's walls in September 1187, part of a refugee column fleeing Saladin's advancing army. The holy city swells with displaced Christians, nobles who lost their fiefs, knights from destroyed garrisons, peasants abandoning villages in Saladin's path. 30,000 people crammed into a city built for 15,000. The streets overflow with humanity, desperation thick as smoke. Balian of Ibelin commands the defence with resources that make victory impossible. Hattin killed the fighting men. Jerusalem holds perhaps a dozen knights, most wounded or elderly. The city militia consists of merchants and craftsmen, handed weapons they barely know how to use. Balian knights every male of fighting age in a desperate ceremony. Butchers and bakers become Sir John and Sir William, nobility conferred by necessity rather than birth. Guillaume volunteers immediately despite his ruined leg. Balian assigns him to the northern wall, the section facing Saladin's main approach. The defences appear formidable from a distance, massive walls built by Romans and strengthened over centuries, towers positioned for overlapping fire. But close inspection reveals decay and neglect. Mortar crumbles between stones, sections lean at dangerous angles. No garrison maintained these walls properly for decades, assuming the field army would keep enemies far away. Saladin's army arrives on September 20th, spreading around the city like a noose tightening. Guillaume watches from the ramparts as tens of thousands of soldiers establish camps, position siege engines, probe for weaknesses. The Muslim army learned siegecraft from decades of experience. They know exactly how to break a city. The bombardment begins immediately, focused on the northern wall, where the ground allows siege engines to approach closely. Trebuchets hurl stones day and night, methodical destruction pounding the same sections until they collapse. Guillaume mount a position above the main gate, watching cracks spread through masonry with each impact. Engineers shore up weak points with timber and rubble, buying hours rather than days. Inside the city, panic spreads faster than the physical damage. Wealthy families try to flee despite there being nowhere to go. Saladin's forces surround Jerusalem completely. Merchants hide their valuables or attempt to smuggle them out through bribes to Muslim commanders. The poor riot for food as supplies dwindle. Balian imposes martial law, hanging looters in public squares. Order maintained through terror because all other authority is evaporated. The first breach opens on September 26th after 6 days of bombardment. A 40-foot section of the northern wall collapses outward, creating a ramp of rubble into the city. Muslim infantry rushes forward immediately. Guillaume and the makeshift defenders meet them in the gap, fighting with the desperation of men protecting their families behind them. The battle in the breach lasts 3 hours. Guillaume kills 2 men, takes a sword cut across his forearm, watches boys barely old enough to grow beards die on Muslim spears. The defenders hold purely through weight of numbers, civilians throwing stones from rooftops, women boiling water to pour on attackers, children running ammunition to the fighting men. The Muslims withdraw at sunset, but everyone knows they'll return. Balian calls a council that night, the reality finally inescapable. The wall is breached, repairs impossible under constant bombardment. Another assault will succeed. Jerusalem will fall. The only question is whether through massacre or negotiated surrender. The Patriarch of Jerusalem argues for fighting to the death, claiming martyrdom guarantees salvation. Balian, pragmatic and exhausted, responds that martyrdom doesn't help the women and children who'll be raped and enslaved when the city falls by storm. Negotiations begin the next morning. Saladin initially demands unconditional surrender. The city taken by force means everything inside becomes spoils of war. Balian makes a calculated threat. If the Muslims storm the city, the Christians will destroy the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque, slaughter all Muslim prisoners, burn everything of value, mutual destruction rather than surrender. Saladin reconsiders. The final terms take 3 days to negotiate. Jerusalem surrenders peacefully. Christian inhabitants can leave safely after paying ransom. 10 gold basins for men, 5 for women, 1 for children. Those who can't pay will be enslaved. The city's treasures and holy sites handed over intact. Muslim and Christian holy places both protected. Saladin grants 40 days for the evacuation. Guillaume watches the surrender ceremony from the walls, feeling numb. The gates open. Saladin's generals enter. The banners of Islam rise over the city while Christian standards come down. 90 years of Crusader occupation ended in a single afternoon. The Kingdom of Jerusalem has ceased to exist except as a legal fiction. The reality of the ransom terms becomes clear immediately. The wealthy pay their fees easily and depart with their possessions intact. The poor face impossible sums. A common labourer earns perhaps 30 bezants in a good year, asked to produce 10 immediately. Families sell everything they own, still falling short. The Patriarch of Jerusalem leaves with wagons full of gold plate from church treasuries, while thousands of Christians can't afford a single bezant. Guillaume uses his remaining money to ransom a family, a widow with 3 children whose husband died at Hattin. The woman reminds him of his mother, the children of siblings he hasn't seen in 2 years. The act depletes his resources but seems right in a situation where nothing else does. They join his small group of refugees planning the march to the coast. Balian negotiates extensions and concessions from Saladin, pleading for the poorest Christians. The Sultan agrees to reduce rates for some, accept payment in installments for others. His mercy exceeds anything Christians showed when they took Jerusalem in 1099 and massacred every Muslim and Jew in the city. Guillaume knows this history now, understands the revenge Saladin could justly claim but chooses not to take. Still, thousands can't pay any ransom. They're marched away into slavery according to the agreed terms. Guillaume watches families separated, men sold to one buyer, women to another, children torn from their mothers. The screaming and weeping echoes through Jerusalem's streets. This is what defeat looks like in medieval warfare. Saladin's mercy means most survive, but survival as slaves in a foreign land. The Muslim reconquest proceeds with surprising care for Christian holy sites. Saladin orders the Church of the Holy Sepulchre preserved, allows Christian pilgrims to continue visiting under negotiated terms. The Dome of the Rock, converted to a church during Crusader occupation, returns to its original purpose. Workers cleanse it with rosewater, removing Christian alterations. The ritual purification takes days, Muslims celebrating the recovery of their third holiest site. Guillaume joins the exodus on October 15th, part of a column 15,000 strong marching toward Tyre. The line stretches for miles, moving at the pace of the slowest. Elderly, children, wounded. Saladin provides guards to escort them through the first stage of the journey, preventing bandits from preying on the refugees. The gesture of protection extends only 30 miles. Beyond that, the Christians travel at their own risk. The journey becomes a nightmare within days. October heat remains brutal. Water sources along the route insufficient for so many people. The strong push ahead, the weak fall behind. Guillaume's group tries to maintain cohesion but loses members steadily. The widow's youngest daughter dies on the 3rd day, dehydration or disease, or just the accumulated stress breaking her small body. They bury her beside the road with no marker, no priest, just a mother's tears and a quick prayer. Bandits strike on the 5th day, raiders from both Christian and Muslim territories seeing easy prey. The column has few weapons, fewer men capable of fighting. The attack kills 20 people and scatters the refugees. Guillaume's group flees into rough country, gets lost, spends 2 days finding the main road again. When they rejoin the exodus, half their number is missing. Disease spreads through the column like wildfire. Dysentery, typhus, cholera. The close quarters and poor sanitation create perfect conditions. People dying of illness outnumber those killed by bandits 3 to 1. Bodies line the roadside, too many to bury properly. Guillaume develops a fever on the 8th day but fights through it, forcing himself to keep moving because stopping means death. The widow dies on the 10th day, collapsing while walking and never rising. Her 2 remaining children, aged 7 and 9, cling to Guillaume in terror. He has no idea how to care for children but can't abandon them. They become his responsibility by default. 2 more weights added to burdens already almost unbearable. Tyre appears on the horizon after 2 weeks of march. 15,000 started the journey. Perhaps 8,000 reached the city. The rest dead, enslaved by bandits, lost, or simply vanished into the chaos. Guillaume arrives with the 2 orphan children, his leg infected again, delirious from fever, barely conscious. The city refuses entry to most refugees. Tyre already overcrowded, food supplies insufficient, disease spreading. The commander, Conrad of Montfort, orders the gates barred except for those who can contribute to the defence. Fighting men, skilled craftsmen, people with money. The refugees who can't prove their worth camp outside the walls in squalid conditions. Guillaume gains entry by claiming military experience, dragging the children with him. A hospitaller physician treats his leg infection for the 3rd time, warning that another bout will require amputation. Guillaume accepts the risk. Death or a missing leg. Both seem preferable to the hell he's endured. Tyre represents the last significant Christian holding in the Holy Land. A single city and a handful of coastal fortresses. This is what remains of the Crusader kingdom. The fall of Jerusalem broke something fundamental in the Crusader consciousness. Guillaume sees it in every veteran's eyes. They don't believe in victory anymore. They believe in survival, nothing more. The 2 children he rescued, Sarah and Thomas, attached to him like orphaned puppies. He finds them space in an overcrowded barracks, shares his food rations, teaches them basic survival skills. They call him uncle, the closest thing to family they have left. Guillaume never planned to become a guardian, but finds the responsibility gives his existence purpose when everything else seems meaningless. News from Europe arrives in December. The Pope has called a new crusade. Kings and emperors taking the cross, promising to reclaim Jerusalem. Guillaume hears this announcement with profound cynicism. He believed those promises once, now he knows better. The new Crusaders will arrive with grand expectations and European tactics. The East will break them as it broke Guillaume, teaching the same harsh lessons in blood and failure. Winter in Tyre brings no relief, just different misery. Cold rain replaces summer heat. The overcrowded city becomes a breeding ground for disease. Food shortages worsen. Fights break out over rations. Guillaume survives by keeping his head down, protecting his charges, accepting that this grinding existence might be all that remains of his crusading dreams. He thinks often about the face of the first man he killed near Tiberias, the Mamluk soldier whose eyes met his in that final moment. The memory has company now. Dozens of faces, Christian and Muslim, men he killed or watched die. They visit his dreams nightly, a growing crowd of the dead. Guillaume no longer knows if he fights for God or simply fights because fighting is all he knows. The crusade that brought him to the Holy Land promised glory and salvation. What he found was heat and thirst and the slow corruption of every certainty he once held. Jerusalem has fallen. The kingdom is destroyed. He's alive, but alive in what feels like the aftermath of apocalypse, surviving in the ruins of a failed dream. The Third Crusade arrives in stages through 1189 and 1190, transforming Tyre from a desperate refuge into a staging ground for renewed war. Guillaume watches the ships arrive with emotions he can't untangle. Hope that reinforcements might change everything. Dread knowing what awaits these fresh soldiers. Bitterness at their naive confidence. The European Crusaders disembark in gleaming armour, singing hymns, believing God guarantees their victory. The first clash between veterans and newcomers happens within days. A German knight, freshly arrived, criticises the Tyre garrison's mixed composition. Eastern Christians fighting alongside Europeans, former enemies now allies, informal truces with local Muslim merchants. The German calls them traitors and cowards. A Poulain knight breaks the German's jaw with a mailed fist. Conrad of Montferrat prevents escalation, but the incident reveals the fundamental divide. Those who've survived years in Outremer versus those who just arrived with European assumptions intact. Guillaume receives assignment as liaison between veteran forces and the German contingent under Frederick Barbarossa. The Germans march overland through Anatolia, arriving depleted by Turkish harassment and disease. Barbarossa drowns crossing a river in June 1190, his death devastating German morale. Guillaume watches thousands of crusaders abandon the campaign immediately, marching home rather than continuing without their emperor. The ones who remain look haunted, their confidence shattered before reaching the Holy Land proper. The French and English forces arrive by sea, Philip Augustus and Richard Lionheart leading the two most powerful armies Europe has mustered. 60,000 men, professional soldiers and knights, siege equipment and supplies to sustain a major campaign. The sheer scale dwarfs anything Guillaume witnessed before. The Crusader states gained this level of support only after losing Jerusalem. Typical. Richard immediately dominates through force of personality and tactical genius. Guillaume meets the Lionheart during a planning session, finds him everything the songs claim: charismatic, brilliant, ruthless. Richard listens to veteran advice about local conditions with real attention, unlike many commanders who dismiss anything contradicting European doctrine. He absorbs information about heat, disease, water management, enemy tactics, then adapts his strategy accordingly. The Crusade's first objective is Acre, besieged by Christian forces for nearly 2 years. Saladin's army surrounds the besiegers, creating a bizarre double siege. Christians investing Acre while Muslims invest the Christian camp. Guillaume joins the siege lines in summer 1190, finding conditions even worse than Kerak. 20,000 soldiers packed into fortified camps, disease rampant, food scarce, combat constant. The siege descends into grinding attrition that makes Guillaume's previous experiences seem brief by comparison. Daily skirmishes between the lines, sortie attempts from Acre's garrison, Muslim attacks on the Christian camp, starvation in all 3 armies simultaneously. Guillaume fights in a dozen engagements over 4 months, each one meaningless except for adding to casualty lists. Men die for yards of ground recaptured the next day. Disease kills more effectively than combat. Scurvy appears first, men's teeth falling out, old wounds reopening. Then typhus spreads through the camps. Dysentery becomes universal. Guillaume can't remember the last time his bowels functioned normally. A mysterious illness the Crusaders call Arnaldia kills hundreds, victims' hair and nails falling out before death. The medical tents overflow. Mass graves fill faster than diggers can extend them. The civilian camp followers suffer worst. Women, children, merchants, prostitutes, thousands of non-combatants attached to the Crusader army. They receive minimal rations, no medical care, sleep in open air. Guillaume watches them die in numbers that dwarf military casualties. A prostitute he occasionally visited for companionship dies of fever in his arms, her last words asking him to find her daughter. He searches for 3 days, never locates the girl. She probably died weeks earlier. Richard arrives in June 1191, changes everything through sheer competence. He organises supply lines, improves sanitation, rotates troops to reduce exhaustion, coordinates the siege engines with military precision. Within weeks, the situation transforms from chaotic slaughter to organised campaign. Guillaume grudgingly admits Richard deserves his reputation. The man understands warfare in ways that transcend individual courage. The final assault on Acre begins in July, after Richard's siege engines breach the walls. Guillaume fights in the attack, his fourth major assault on a fortified position. The experience has become routine. The clash in the breach, the desperate melee, the eventual breakthrough. Acre falls after absorbing casualties that would have broken lesser armies. 3,000 Christian dead in the final assault. The garrison surrenders under terms, 2,700 Muslim soldiers becoming prisoners. The aftermath reveals the Crusade's uglier reality. Richard negotiates ransom for the prisoners, Saladin to pay gold and return Christian captives held since Hattin. The deadline passes with incomplete payment. Richard orders the massacre of all 2,700 prisoners in full view of Saladin's army. The execution takes hours, soldiers killing bound men methodically, while Muslims watch helpless from a distance. Guillaume participates in the massacre because refusing means charges of insubordination or cowardice. He kills 6 men personally, each one on his knees with hands tied, each one looking at Guillaume with eyes that understand death is coming. The work leaves him numb. That night he vomits until nothing remains in his stomach, then vomits bile. This is the holy war he crossed the Mediterranean to fight, murdering prisoners because a king found political advantage in it. The crusade fragments immediately after Acre. Philip Augustus, sick and politically exhausted, returns to France with most of his forces. The Germans largely departed earlier. Richard remains with perhaps 15,000 effective soldiers, facing Saladin's army of comparable size. The Lionheart plans to march on Jerusalem, restore Christian control, achieve the Crusade's ultimate objective. The march begins in August through summer heat that kills dozens daily. Richard learned from Hattin's disaster. The army moves slowly, maintains access to water, scouts carefully. They fight a series of engagements with Saladin's forces, neither side able to inflict decisive defeat. At Arsuf, Richard wins a tactical victory through perfect cavalry timing, but Saladin's army withdraws intact. The campaign becomes a war of manoeuvre and attrition. Guillaume rides with the Hospitaller contingent, his role now training fresh knights in survival techniques. He's become what Gerard and the other Poulains were when he arrived, a veteran whose knowledge bought in blood and suffering. The new Crusaders listen with varying degrees of attention. Some adapt quickly. Others cling to European methods until the climate or combat kills them. The army reaches within 12 miles of Jerusalem by January 1192. Guillaume can see the city walls from high ground, the place he came to liberate 4 years ago. Richard calls a war council. The military reality is brutal. Jerusalem can be taken, probably besieged successfully, but holding it proves impossible. Supply lines from the coast stretch too far. Saladin can besiege the besiegers. The Crusader army would wither through attrition exactly as happened before Hattin. Richard makes the decision no previous Crusader leader managed. He chooses tactical sense over religious symbolism. The army withdraws without attacking Jerusalem. The Crusaders came to reclaim the Holy City. They're leaving it in Muslim hands by deliberate choice. The decision devastates morale. Common soldiers weep openly. Some knights accuse Richard of betrayal. Guillaume understands Richard's reasoning intellectually, but feels the emotional weight. He travelled 3,000 miles, survived disease and combat and captivity, watched friends die and killed enemies, all supposedly to retake Jerusalem. Now, standing close enough to see its walls, they're walking away. The futility crushes something inside him that was already badly damaged. The crusade devolves into politics and negotiation. Richard and Saladin communicate through envoys, feeling toward compromise. The Lionheart proposes marriage between his sister and Saladin's brother, creating a joint Christian-Muslim kingdom. The plan collapses over religious objections from both sides. Other proposals surface and die. Partition, tributary status, various levels of shared control. Nothing resolves the fundamental problem that both religions claim exclusive divine mandate over the same territory. The final treaty, signed in September 1192, represents pragmatic acknowledgement of stalemate. Saladin retains Jerusalem and the interior. Christians keep the coastal strip from Tyre to Jaffa. Christian pilgrims receive guaranteed access to Jerusalem under Muslim protection. Trade resumes, prisoners exchanged. The agreement essentially restores the status quo minus Jerusalem itself. 3 years of war to end up where things stood before the campaign began, except with tens of thousands dead. Guillaume witnesses the treaty ceremony feeling nothing. The Grand Crusade achieved partial restoration of coastal territory at enormous cost. Jerusalem remains Muslim. The Crusader kingdoms survive as diminished shadows of their former selves. Europe sent its greatest kings and armies. They fought well, won battles, negotiated reasonable terms. They failed to accomplish the Crusade's stated objective. Richard departs for Europe in October, his reputation enhanced despite the strategic failure. Guillaume watches the Lionheart ship disappear over the horizon, taking with it the last pretense that European intervention could restore Christian dominance. What remains are the people who live here permanently. Poulains, local Christians, Muslims, Jews, all trying to coexist in territory too holy for anyone to share willingly. The other Crusaders scatter to various fates. Some return to Europe, carrying stories that will become legends disconnected from reality. Others die of lingering diseases contracted during the campaign. A few settle in the restored Crusader territories, becoming the next generation of Poulains. Guillaume falls into this last category almost by default. He has nowhere else to go. The orphans Sarah and Thomas survive the Crusade in Tyre's relative safety. Guillaume returns to find them healthy, Sarah now 12, Thomas 10. They've learned to navigate Tyre's complex society, speak Arabic and French, work odd jobs for food. They've become outre-mer children, adaptable, multilingual, belonging everywhere and nowhere. Guillaume recognizes his own transformation in their eyes. The kingdom of Jerusalem exists in name only, reduced to a coastal strip defended by exhausted garrisons and maintained through treaties no one expects to last. Guillaume finds work training new arrivals, the endless stream of crusaders who keep coming despite the obvious futility. Each wave arrives believing they'll succeed where previous generations failed. Guillaume teaches them what he can, watches most die anyway. He's 27 years old. 4 years in the Holy Land aged him beyond his years. His leg never healed properly, giving him a permanent limp. Scars cover his body from a dozen wounds. He speaks Arabic better than French now, thinks in Eastern terms, finds European culture alien when he encounters it. The man who left Burgundy in 1187 no longer exists. What remains is something hybrid, not quite European, not quite Levantine, belonging fully to neither world. Guillaume receives word from France in the spring of 1193, a letter carried by Templar bankers who move correspondence across continents. His father died in December. The estate passed to Pierre as expected. The younger brother, now the lord, offers Guillaume a small manor on the family's least profitable land, a grudging acknowledgement of blood ties with no real value. The message clear. You abandoned your inheritance for crusading foolishness. This is all you deserve. The offer forces Guillaume to confront the choice he's been avoiding for months. Return to France as a minor noble with a limp and nothing else, or remain in Outre-mer where he's built a life from the wreckage of war. The decision should be simple. Europe represents civilization, stability, a return to the world he knew. Acre represents continued danger, disease, the grinding uncertainty of frontier existence. He spends 3 days considering, then burns the letter unanswered. Pierre can keep the estate. Guillaume no longer fits in that world even if he wanted to return. The man who would accept a manor in Burgundy died somewhere between Marseille and Damascus, buried in unmarked graves along with 15 companions from the original company. The practical realities of staying require immediate attention. Guillaume has no land, no title recognised in Outremer's complex feudal system, no steady income beyond his wages training new crusaders. He's 28, crippled, with 2 orphans depending on him. The future looks grim unless he can establish something more permanent. Opportunity arrives through unexpected channels. A Poulin merchant named Eustace offers Guillaume partnership in a trading venture. Caravans moving between Acre and Damascus carrying goods both Christian and Muslim markets demand. The work requires someone with military experience to lead guards, someone who speaks Arabic and understands local customs. Eustace knows Guillaume's reputation, his relationships with both Muslim merchants and Christian authorities. The partnership offers steady income and a path towards stability. Guillaume accepts despite the irony of becoming a merchant after years as a warrior. The first caravan departs in June. 40 camels loaded with European cloth and metalwork heading to Damascus, scheduled to return with Syrian silk and spices. Guillaume commands a guard force of 12, 6 Christian soldiers, 6 Muslim mercenaries, the mixture standard for these hybrid enterprises. They cross territory claimed by both faiths and neither, following routes where trade matters more than theology. The journey reveals a side of Outremer Guillaume glimpsed but never fully understood. The war continues in some regions. Fortresses under siege, border raids, occasional battles. But commerce flows around and through the conflict like water around stones. Italian merchants maintain warehouses in both Acre and Damascus. Caravans travel under negotiated safe conducts. Local lords on both sides profit from trade regardless of which god they worship. The grand religious narrative exists, but underneath runs a current of economic pragmatism that makes the whole system function. Guillaume's first trading venture returns profitable after 3 weeks, Eustace's investment yielding 30% return. The second caravan in August does even better. By autumn, Guillaume has saved enough silver to rent a house in Acre, moving Sarah and Thomas out of barracks into real quarters. The girl, now 13, showing early signs of the beauty she'll become. The boy 11, interested in everything, asking endless questions. They've become his family in ways Guillaume never anticipated. The house sits in Acre's Pisan quarter, a neighbourhood mixing Italian merchants, Poulin noble, Eastern Christian families, even a few Muslim artisans whose skills make them valuable despite their faith. The diversity would scandalise European crusaders, but this is how Outremer actually functions beneath the surface rhetoric. Guillaume's neighbours include a Venetian silk trader, an Armenian goldsmith, a Syrian Christian woman who runs a bakery. They coexist through practical necessity and shared commercial interests. Guillaume meets Miriam at the bakery, initially just a customer buying bread but returning more frequently than hunger justifies. She's 25, daughter of a Poulin knight killed at Hatton, widowed when her husband died during Acre's siege. She speaks French, Arabic and Greek, runs her business with competence that impresses Guillaume. Her eyes carry the same haunted knowledge he sees in his own reflection. She's survived the wars, lost everything, rebuilt from nothing. The relationship develops slowly over autumn months, conversations during bread purchases extending into longer discussions about trade, the wars, life in Outremer's uncertain present. Miriam's pragmatism matches Guillaume's own. She's not interested in grand gestures or romantic fantasies. She wants security, partnership, someone capable of surviving the next crisis. Guillaume can offer those things, if nothing else. They marry in December 1193, a small ceremony in Acres Church of St Andrew. No family attends. Guillaume's are 3,000 miles away. Miriam's dead. Sarah and Thomas witness the vows alongside Eustace and a handful of business associates. The priest conducts a brief service, blessing a union based on mutual advantage and hard-won respect rather than passion. Guillaume finds this honest foundation more solid than the romantic love songs from his youth. The marriage changes his legal status in Outremer's complex system. Through Miriam's father's lands, now hers as a widowed heir, Guillaume gains modest holdings near Acre, olive groves and a small vineyard. The property generates income while requiring minimal oversight. Combined with trading profits, he achieves something resembling financial security for the first time since leaving France. Sarah and Thomas adjust to the new household arrangement with the adaptability of children raised in chaos. Miriam treats them with practical kindness, seeing them as Guillaume's responsibility but accepting their presence. The four of them form an unconventional family unit: a French crusader turned merchant, a Poulain widow, two orphans from Jerusalem's fall. They represent Outremer's future if it has one, people whose identities transcend simple European or Eastern categories. Guillaume's trading enterprises expand through 1194 and 1195, 3 caravans running regularly between Christian and Muslim territories, a warehouse in Acre, partnerships with Italian shipping companies. The work proves more challenging than warfare in some ways, negotiating with merchants sharper than any Saracen general, managing accounts, anticipating market fluctuations. But the rewards accumulate steadily, building wealth that military service never offered. The irony doesn't escape him. He came to the Holy Land to fight Muslims for Christ's glory. He's ended up in business with them, sharing profits, establishing relationships that depend on stability rather than conflict. The Crusade's theological certainties collapsed under reality's weight. What emerged is this hybrid society, where people of different faiths coexist through economic interdependence, even as their leaders periodically wage war. Miriam becomes pregnant in early 1195, delivering a daughter that autumn. Guillaume names her Constance after his mother in Burgundy, a gesture toward a past that feels increasingly distant. Holding his newborn child, Guillaume realizes he's built something permanent in Outremer. This isn't temporary crusading service anymore. This is life, with all the mundane complications that implies. The Crusader state's political situation remains precarious through these years. Saladin dies in 1193, his empire fragmenting among heirs who fight each other as much as Christians. The Christian kingdoms exploit these divisions, recovering some lost territory through negotiation and limited warfare. The equilibrium shifts constantly but never decisively in either direction. Guillaume watches from his merchant's perspective, seeing how each crisis and treaty affects trade routes and commercial opportunities. New crusaders continue arriving from Europe in irregular waves, individuals and small groups rather than the massive armies of the Third Crusade. Guillaume encounters them constantly: fresh-faced knights who believe they'll reclaim Jerusalem, veterans who return after years' absence expecting to find the situation changed. He offers what help he can while maintaining the necessary distance. These men represent what he used to be, a past self he can barely remember clearly. His training work continues alongside the trading ventures, teaching newcomers the basics of survival in Outremer's climate and tactical environment. The lessons never change. Drink more water than you think necessary. Abandon heavy armor for lighter gear. Learn the terrain. Understand that the enemy is professional and skilled. Some students listen and survive. Others ignore the advice and die. Guillaume has stopped caring which category individuals fall into, the emotional investment too exhausting to maintain. Sarah reaches 15 in 1195, attracting attention from young knights and merchants' sons. Guillaume finds himself playing reluctant father, evaluating potential suitors, establishing dowry terms. Miriam handles the negotiations with more skill, her understanding of Acre's social dynamics superior to Guillaume's. They arrange a betrothal to a Venetian merchant's son, a match that strengthens business connections while providing Sarah a secure future. Thomas shows aptitude for languages and numbers, spending hours with Eustace learning the trading business. At 13, he speaks 4 languages fluently, calculates exchange rates faster than most adults, understands the political dynamics affecting commerce. Guillaume recognizes the boy will surpass him, building on foundations Guillaume laid but extending far beyond. The thought brings satisfaction rather than jealousy. At least something good emerged from Jerusalem's catastrophe. Guillaume's own evolution completes during these years of merchant life. The knight who charged at Hattin belongs to ancient history. What remains is a practical man who navigates between cultures, making compromises that enable survival, finding meaning in commerce and family rather than grand religious narratives. He's become a true Poulain, the transformation complete. He still dreams occasionally of the men he killed, their faces visiting less frequently but never disappearing entirely. The Mamluk soldier at Tiberias, the prisoners at Acre, dozens of others whose names he never knew. They're the price he paid for survival, the weight he carries. Guillaume has stopped seeking redemption or justification. These are simply facts, pieces of the past that shaped who he became. Miriam gives birth to a son in 1196, another tie binding Guillaume to Outremer. He names the boy Pierre after his brother, a complicated gesture acknowledging family despite estrangement. The child will grow up speaking Arabic and French, wearing Eastern and Western clothing, navigating multiple worlds as naturally as breathing. Guillaume's children will be fully Levantine, their European heritage diluted to stories and names. A letter from Pierre arrives in 1197, carried by a crusader passing through Acre. The estate in Burgundy prospers, Pierre writes, no thanks to Guillaume's abandonment. Their mother died 2 years previous. Pierre waited this long to inform Guillaume, a petty cruelty that stings more than expected. The letter includes no invitation to visit, no suggestion of reconciliation. Guillaume burns it as he burned the previous one, severing the last threads connecting him to France. He's 32, a merchant with a Poulain wife, 4 children by blood or circumstance, property in Acre, trading partnerships across the Levant. The crusader who landed at this same port 7 years ago would barely recognize what he became. That man believed in absolute truths, divine missions, clear distinctions between good and evil. The current Guillaume knows only that survival requires adaptability, that truth comes in shades rather than absolutes, that the world's complexity exceeds any theology's ability to contain it. The Crusades continue in waves, European kings and nobles periodically arriving with armies to reclaim Jerusalem. Guillaume watches these efforts with weary knowledge of how they'll end. Partial victories, negotiated truces, gradual attrition. The cycle repeats because no one learns from previous failures. Or perhaps they learn, but the political and religious pressures demanding crusades override practical considerations. Guillaume finds himself grateful he stopped trying to change the world. His crusade ended at Hattin, buried in the heat and blood and catastrophic defeat. What followed was survival and adaptation, building something small and personal from the wreckage. He liberated no holy city, achieved no grand purpose, became no hero. He simply lived, which in Outremer counts as its own kind of victory. Standing on Acre's walls one evening in 1198, watching the sun set over the Mediterranean, Guillaume reflects on the journey. The naive knight from Burgundy died long ago in this alien land. What survived learned to see from multiple perspectives, to value practical wisdom over theological certainty, to find meaning in small things rather than grand gestures. He came to save the Holy Land, but discovered the Holy Land didn't need saving. It needed people willing to live in it honestly, accepting its complexity rather than imposing simple narratives. His personal crusade ended not with victory or defeat, but with transformation. The land changed him completely, breaking down everything he believed and forcing him to rebuild from fundamentals. Whether that makes him stronger or just different, he can't say. But he's alive, his family flourishes, and he understands this place in ways newly arrived crusaders never will. That knowledge, hard-won and blood-bought, is the only treasure he brought home from the wars,